Good morning, everyone. It is January 15th, Wednesday, 2020, so we're told. Thank you for watching another video from A Theory of Nothing channel. I, of course, am the host, Scott Schaefer. Wanted to discuss a little bit today about a new revelation that actually occurred back before the first of the year for me and my wife. And then I asked a few people that I know that are in the community what their recollection was. And they were actually in tune with what my wife and I thought. So, question proposed to you guys is, how many space shuttle disasters were there? And I'm sure without fail, everyone in here can name at least one, being the most famous one. But if you remember, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, do me a favor real quick, pause the video, in the comment section write the name of the space shuttle and if you can remember the year, and how many, if any, astronauts got injured or died in the crash or disaster or whatever we're talking about. Okay, so number one is the Challenger. 7 astronauts, most famously recognized. There was the first civilian to go into space that was just strictly average, everyday civilian. Did training, obviously, for it, the space flight, but it was supposed to be the first initiation of a program with NASA collaborating with the general population. It was a school teacher. She had no other background before being trained for this flight. And the name of the shuttle was the Challenger. Now, the Challenger had apparently, from the videos that you watch, exploded in January of 1986. Okay, during takeoff, an O-ring connecting one of the rockets to the fuel canister had failed, causing a catastrophic explosion, thereby incinerating the canisters and the shuttle itself. Now, history has, of course, changed for me on that one, because as you can find now through doing information on NASA's website, space.com, and all that stuff, is that it wasn't really when the explosion occurred, and now they're re-referencing it as something different than just a regular explosion, that the space shuttle itself, the crew cabin, was not it was damaged to a degree, but it was not basically incinerated. And at, I think it was like 40,000 feet is when the explosion or whatever occurred that you've seen in the videos, that the crew cabin of the space shuttle actually continued upwards for another 20,000 feet before losing altitude and returning back to Earth. Now, supposedly it wasn't just a chunk of molten steel coming back down. It was actually a completely intact crew cabin, and a chunk of the shuttle was still intact. Some scientists who had gone back and studied it and things like that, investigators, originally had thought maybe the crew had died from asphyxiation, loss of cabin pressure and air pressure. But when they had gone and done a deeper study on there, they realized that based on some of the switches that were turned, so obviously there was enough of this cabin area intact that they could tell there was certain levers and buttons in the cabin that were turned on by the crew post-explosion, and even things on their gear, on their suits. Then they further speculated that, okay, well, perhaps the impact on the water was enough of an impact to kill them. And then further, there's other scientists saying no, they actually drowned after they came down and crashed into the water because the cabin filled with water, and they were injured from the impact or knocked unconscious from the impact, and then they had drowned. So there's so many different theories about it that it's kind of a little bit crazy. So let's move on to another one. Did you write down any other crashes or disasters that you could think of? If now another one is coming to mind after I brought up the Challenger, please go ahead and pause the video and write it in the comments section. Name of the shuttle and or date. Now, would it surprise you if I was to tell you that in February, the end of February, almost January of 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia had crashed? Now, I clearly remember it crashing, but no one got injured. I remember that President Bush had come out and he talked about it, that the Space Shuttle Columbia, upon re-entry into Earth, had obtained some damage or something like that by a piece of foam debris hitting it, or hitting either one of the heat shield panels or the wings, caused an ignition to occur, and that the plane had to be guided down by like an F-16 to land in Florida, and then the wheel gear wouldn't go down or something like that, so it was like a crash landing. But fortunately, some astronauts were alive and well and only received minor injuries, but that the shuttle was completely, it was lost. It was completely destroyed. So it took one of the shuttles that had been in commission since like 81 out. Now, Columbia had flown over 28 missions, but in this current history, on the re-entry, that's not when the foam had hit it. On the re-entry, apparently there was already damage done to the wing of the shuttle, and it disintegrated upon re-entry, killing all 7 astronauts. Now, when we heard this, we were watching a TV show called Travelers, which is about some time travelers, and it's a Netflix show. It's about time travelers who come back to the 21st century from the future, like 25th century or something like that. They come back to the 21st century via a quantum computer who transfers their consciousness from their body in the future into the body of a person that is basically about ready to die based on historical data. So in other words, if someone's ready to get in a car accident, for instance, and they're going to die, this quantum computer would jump one of the traveler's consciousness into that body, and then they would stop the accident from occurring or whatever. And these travelers are sent back to take corrective action against major catastrophes that were brought on by either humans or extraterrestrial, like asteroid collisions or different things like that. So that was the whole point of the whole premise of the show. And they send back teams of 5, so they find 5 individuals within so many miles of each other that are going to die on and around the same time frame, usually within a couple of days of each other. And they jump their consciousness of people from the future into the bodies of the people in the present, overriding the consciousness of the person in the present. And they can only go back as far as the 21st century because it needs a Wi-Fi connected computer technology to do this. So cell phone, TV, computer, whatever. But anyways, in one of the episodes, like end of season 2 or something like that, they talk about several teams have been back before this team had gone back, and they were sent back to try to stop the second major space shuttle disaster in history, which was the Columbia in 2008. And when we first saw that, again, this was before the first of the year, we paused because it struck me, like, when Mandela effects, right? When they resonate with you, it is like getting shock treatment, right? I mean, it is jarring to your soul, to your body. So that was like real jarring to me, and I looked at my wife after I paused the TV, and she looked at me, and she's like, what did they just say? And I said, they said the Columbia. She goes, no, it's the Challenger. And I said, well, it's the Challenger. Challenger was like in the 80s. They're saying Columbia in 2008 and 3. And I was like, that ain't right. So, of course, I pulled up the phone, Googled it out, went to NASA's website, confirmed that yes, upon re-entry. Anyways, I did some follow-up research on it over last week to find out that what had happened to the Columbia was, upon their exit up to space, a piece of foam, which is an insulator that is on the one of the rocket boosters, has, when the rocket boosters are getting ready to separate, a lot of times the foam will come apart on there. It's wrapped in there to protect it from the heat dispersion, things like that. Well, anyways, it had come off and it had hit the wing on the space shuttle, causing damage. And they found this via, like, when they follow it with the filmography tracker, and then they have different, they don't just use a regular film too, they also run an infrared sensor and all sorts of different things. So when they went back and were looking at it with the infrared sensors, they discovered, okay, yeah, it looks like there was a block. They thought it was ice, which they didn't think would be a big deal, but then they come to find out, no, it's a chunk of foam. Well, after they went back through historical records, they discovered that on almost every single flight of the Columbia, specifically, that there was a chunk of foam debris that had come off and struck the shuttle at some point, whether it be on the wing, on the fuselage, on the side panels, one of the heat shield runs, somewhere. It had always struck the plane. So this had occurred for the last 20 years of its space flights, on the last 28 missions, and it had apparently never been an issue up till now. And they thought, well, there's no way, if it's lasted this long, that it could have happened. So they built a gigantic mock wing, of the same construction, and then they had a cannon, an air cannon that they put up to basically shoot blocks of foam at this wing at the estimated speed at which the rocket would have been traveling. And then the foam would have been traveling against the rocket as it came apart. It was being held back by gravity. And they did, like, I don't know, over the course of 2 years, they did like 280 or some odd tests. And you look at a lot of the videos in the test, and it doesn't look like the wing gets damaged at all, like the foam just skips off of it. But then there were several of them that it actually, like, tore completely through the wing, causing a huge damage to both the outside and the inside. Some had just caused a little bit of damage to the outside. So they said, well, this has to be the root cause of what happened. Now, that makes zero sense to me, because that shuttle had gone up into space and was up there for like a 22-day mission or something like that. It went up in January. It was coming back down like the end of February, or middle to end of February, whatever. So it had been up for like 28 days or something like that. And it was all, space station work and stuff like that. Well, so the astronauts would have been out doing spacewalks to put modules together and all sorts of things. They would have had a sensor, because apparently the shuttles were riddled with sensors. So that was part of what NASA knew, was a sensor on the wing had indicated that debris or something had hit it. And that's what caused them to actually go back and look at the footage. So the astronauts would have had time to have gone out and seen that the wing was damaged or torn and either needed to be repaired, or if it couldn't be, well, guess what? They would have sent up another shuttle to recover them. So the whole thing is odd. And again, I remember Bush coming out and talking about it and mentioning that, you know, the Columbia had come down. It was a tragic day because the U.S. had lost one of its space shuttles. But the good news was that the astronauts survived with minor injuries. And they'd gone on to explain that it was this chunk of foam that had hit the wing. There was no talk about it happening earlier than that. There was never a talk about it completely disintegrating the plane upon re-entry. None of that. In my reality, in my history. So the other part of that I've always known, from even going back to the 80s and to within the last year or two, has been, what does the acronym for NASA stand for? As a side pun, right? It has always been what? Make a comment in the comment section below if you know what the acronym for NASA stands for. And I don't mean the National Aeronautic Space Administration, which is what it actually means, but I don't mean that. There's always maybe a bad taste pun of what NASA meant. So from the 80s through the 90s into the 2000s, it has always been, no matter what, for me, need another 7 astronauts. Okay, so that would have worked up to the early 2000s, but then in the later 2000s, that acronym would have had to have changed because now it's need another 14 astronauts. So it would be NAFA, which is not what NASA is. NASA is NASA. So really, really weird, strange thing. Now, I don't know if any of this is a Mandela effect for you. It may not. You may have total cognitive remembrance of both shuttles, both disasters, how they all went down and everything else. And that's kind of one of the things with the Mandela effect is I believe it really is an experience, a conscious experience for reality. And two of us could be sitting here at the same time, and I'm sitting here in my seat, and there could be someone sitting here in the passenger seat, and our observations of our reality in our surroundings can be totally different. My wife and I have experienced that here and there randomly, and it's not a lot of stuff. And I don't want to misspeak on her behalf because she gets mad at me when I do that. And she'll rewatch my videos and be like, "Well, that's not exactly what I said," and don't do this, don't do that. And I'll be like, "Okay, look, it's a generalized point to get across to people. They, you guys weren't there in the conversation. Yes, there's the sun rays shooting right through my back window right now. I'm on my way to work, but experiences can vary. Now, my wife and I are massively, 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 massively synchronized. Probably more so than I think most people who even say that them and their spouse or significant other are synced and in tune. Ruth Ann and I have always been since the beginning of the Mandela effect. Even though I'm the one who kind of discovered the term to apply to it before she did, and then kind of interjected her into it, we had both been having the experiences of the weirdness and the strangeness and waking dreams and reality shifts and all sorts of different things, name shifts, song shifts, all weird stuff. And each of us in our own state had just kind of chalked those things up to bad memory or not paying attention or having mental breakdowns, right? I thought for a long time, and this is going back to around 2008 for me and around the same time frame for her, that I had a lot of job stress and family stresses and things like that. And with her and I being together, it wasn't that, there was there was some family stresses there, but it wasn't as much. But there was just a lot of stresses for both of us going on in our lives. And I thought, I was just having a nervous breakdown. And I thought my observations of reality are so skewed that I'm a nut job. And I even started looking into, back then, into psychosis and into mental hospitals and into medication to counteract psychosis and different things like that. And it wasn't as mainstream massive as it is now. There was, now, as you guys know, once you become aware of the Mandela effect, there's this massive upswing of effects that occur, and it's because our consciousness has become heightened and elevated and aware to the liquidity of our reality, or fluidity, as people will say, of our reality. Going back to the physical vessel, even if you're thinking simulation theory, the physical construct that we experience in that, with the way the particles are made up and the amount of empty space and all that stuff. That show Travelers, if you guys haven't checked it out, it's only 3 seasons. It's on Netflix. It's free. It's a cool show to watch. Well, it's free if you have a subscription, but it's a cool show to watch. And if you don't watch TV shows at all, then don't worry about it. But it touches really into the basis of quantum entanglement with particles and quantum computers and consciousness transfer. And it kind of speaks to what we in this Mandela effect community are experiencing, right? A lot of us feel as though our consciousness has been shifted into an alternate avatar, an alternate reality. We're not in the Sagittarius arm anymore. We're in the Orion belt. We have physical body changes. We have reality perception changes all around us. So we can't just go to, some of the history has been altered, that it is necessarily time travel, right? But in a lot of things, like when it comes to TV shows or movies or things like that, or disclosures, government disclosures or different things like that, there's always bits of truth scattered in with fantasy, right? So there's always some science mixed in with the fantasy, and I truly believe that, even talking like maybe Star Trek and things like that. But yeah, so just let me know in the comment section what you think of this video. Let me know if any of that resonates or anything else of this video resonates with you. Let me know your experiences. I love hearing from you guys. I try to, fortunately I'm not heavy on subscribers, so the comment sections are usually fairly light, so I can go ahead and respond to you guys. It might take me a week or something like that to get back to you, but I always try to get back to everyone and at least make a quick little comment, if nothing else, for sure, and heart. And again, as long as you're not being rude, I don't care what kind of comment you made. If this thing doesn't resonate with you at all, then this is not tuned into your quantum effect. It is not tuned into your Mandela effect. It is an effect of my reality and my consciousness. The other thing I want to talk about real quick, because the sun flare right here in my window is reminding me of some comments from some of my subscribers from my last video. And they're talking about, crepuscular rays and sun and moon being local. One of the big things here for me in Arizona, and I think I touched on this in a previous video, is that the street that we live on runs east and west true to a map. So if you go to a map, you hit true north on the map, and it recenters perfect north. My house faces directly south. So my street is an east to west street. So by traditional, from the old Sagittarius arm, sunrise to sunset, the sun would rise in the east and it would set in the west. Now in the winter time, right, it's further south because it's on the south equator. That's their summer. And in the summertime, it would just be further north. But it was always almost a perfect straight arch of east to west. East, straight over the top, to west. Now, since becoming aware of the Mandela effect, obviously discovering that we're in Orion now, the sun and the moon both go in an elliptical shape. So it actually rises in the slightly northeast, travels to the south as it's going west, and then after it passes about midday noon, it turns around and goes back to the north, and it sets in the northwest. Now it's not northwest, but I mean to position of my house, It starts here, comes around like that, and goes like that. It's like a mini orbit. And the moon does a similar thing, which is what's really odd, because it throws the phase of the moon out of sync with where the location of the sun and the moon relative to the Earth's position, and how they would, how the one would be lighting the other's face, out of whack and out of position. And of course, they both appear more local. I mean, shit, I have a hard time seeing the words on a roadside 100 yards away, yet I can make out craters with my same naked eyes without glasses on, and that is how many millions of miles away from Earth, right? So, don't always buy into the bullshit. That doesn't mean now that the surface, I mean, obviously the surface we're driving on is pretty flat, it's pretty level. Doesn't mean that that's the shape of the Mother Earth that we're on, but it doesn't mean that it's not. It also doesn't mean that it's round, and it doesn't mean that it's not. We don't know the overall exact trueness of shape. We can rely on NASA, supposedly, who has a space shuttle up in the atmosphere looking down on the Earth that's traveling around it, that indicates that it's a ball shape. But if we want to believe that, then we have to almost fall into and believe anything else that ever comes out of their mouth. And there's just too much discrepancies with their own scientists doing interviews and videos to lend credence that they're 100% honest, upfront, and intact. Governments lie and admit to lying all the time to protect the general population. So, anyhow, like the video, subscribe if you're not, share the video. You're always welcome to share any of my videos. And again, I'm just going to say, this video is not intended for children. It is intended for you. So be safe, be conscious, be aware. And until the next video, I've been your host, Scott Schaefer. Thank you for watching A Theory of Nothing.